November 1986, Southside Chicago. A black Cadillac limousine cruised down the dimly lit streets. Then, without warning, gunfire exploded from behind. Bullets ripped through the rear window. Willie "Flukey" Stokes slumped forward in the back seat, blood spreading across his silk suit. His driver was hit too. In just seconds, one of the most colorful and feared figures in Chicago's underworld lay dying.
Flukey Stokes had built something massive. He ran dozens of drug houses across the South Side and brought in over $1 million a week.
The man was known for his flashy style. Custom silk suits, diamond rings, and long Cadillacs defined his image. He lived like a king and operated like a businessman. Only months earlier, he had made headlines for throwing a $200,000 anniversary party at the Roberts Motel, the same motel where his own son had been murdered. But on this cold November night, someone close to him decided the party was finally over. Little did Flukey know, the greatest threat was not coming from his rivals on the street. It was already sitting right behind him. Back in the late 1970s, Willie "Flukey" Stokes was already making moves. He started small, running a pool hall on the south side of Chicago and taking bets on dice games in the back room. But Flukey had bigger plans. He watched how the heroin trade worked and decided it was time to step in. Within a few years, he turned those backroom games into a full operation. He set up his first drug houses, picked trusted lieutenants, and made sure every corner of the neighborhood answered to him. Flukey ran things like a businessman, not a street thug. He demanded loyalty and paid well for it. By the early 1980s, his network had grown to more than 40 drug houses spread across the South Side. The money rolled in fast, over $1 million a week at its peak. He used the cash to live exactly the way he wanted. Custom silk suits, diamond rings on every finger, and long Cadillacs parked outside every spot he owned. People on the block called him Flukey because everything seemed to fall his way. He made decisions fast and never looked back. When rivals tried to push into his territory, Flukey struck first. He expanded into gambling dens and protection rackets, always keeping the operation tight. Authorities in Chicago started to notice. Local police began watching his crew, but Flukey stayed one step ahead. He changed routes, rotated stash houses, and kept his inner circle small. The empire felt untouchable, yet Flukey had a softer side that everyone on the South Side knew about. He looked after his family. His son, Willie Stokes Jr., nicknamed the Wimp, worked inside the operation too. Flukey brought him in close, teaching him the ropes. He wanted the kid to inherit everything one day. But the streets never stayed quiet for long. By 1984, the pressure was building. Rivals circled closer, and law enforcement started asking questions. Flukey kept pushing forward, convinced his throne was secure. He had no idea how personal the next blow would get, or how close it would hit to home. It came on the night of 24th February, 1984. Flukey Stokes received the call while handling late-night business. His 28-year-old son, Willie Stokes Jr., known as the Wimp, had been shot at the Roberts Motel on the South Side. The young man had arrived to check on a heroin shipment. He never made it inside. Gunfire erupted in the parking lot. Multiple shooters. Willie Jr. was hit several times and died on the scene. The news hit Flukey hard. This was his son, the one he had groomed to take over the operation. For the first time, the man who always kept his cool felt the streets hit back in the most painful way possible. Within hours, Flukey was moving. He sent his most trusted men to the motel to gather information. Police were already investigating, but Flukey ran his own parallel inquiry. A drug deal gone bad was the official story. But he wanted names. He wanted faces. He wanted payback. At the same time, something else was forming in his mind. A plan that would turn his personal tragedy into a public statement. The flamboyant Kingpin, who loved Cadillacs and diamonds, decided his son would not leave this world quietly. The empire continued operating. Money still flowed. But the atmosphere around Flukey had changed. Tension was rising. Authorities increased their surveillance, hoping the murder would create cracks in his organization. Rivals waited, to see if the Kingpin would stumble. Flukey, however, was already thinking bigger. He was preparing to give his son a send-off that Chicago would never forget. Flukey wasted no time turning grief into a spectacle Chicago had never seen. Just days after the shooting at the Roberts Motel, he made his choice. He ordered a custom Cadillac Coffin for his son. The vehicle-shaped casket gleamed under the lights at the funeral home on the south side. Inside, Willie Jr. lay dressed in his best clothes. Flukey added stacks of cash and diamond rings to the display. He wanted the world to know exactly who his son was and who stood behind him. On the morning of the service, the streets filled early. More than 2,000 people showed up. Cadillacs lined the block for blocks. The procession rolled slow through the neighborhood, horns blaring, engines purring. Flukey rode in the lead car, eyes hidden behind dark glasses, face set like stone. He had paid for everything: the flowers, the music, the security. This was not just a burial. This was his message to the streets. Authorities watched every move. Chicago police officers stood at the edges of the crowd, taking notes and snapping photos. They hoped the public display would reveal new leads or crack open Flukey's tight circle. But the Kingpin stayed composed. He shook hands, accepted condolences, and kept his operation running in the background. The heroin houses never missed a beat. After the service, Flukey returned to business as usual. The empire kept growing. The money kept flowing. Yet something had shifted inside him. The loss of his son left a mark. He began talking about legacy more often. He spoke about protecting what he had built. And quietly, in the weeks that followed, another plan started to form. A way to honor the past while reminding everyone exactly who still ruled the South Side. Flukey found the perfect way to honor the past while reminding everyone exactly who still ruled the South Side. In early 1985, he made the call. He would throw a $200,000 anniversary party to celebrate 30 years of marriage. The venue he chose was no accident. He booked the entire Roberts Motel, the same building where his son had been shot and killed less than a year earlier. He wanted the night to be bigger than anything Chicago had ever seen from a man in his position. Caterers, flowers, security, and top entertainers were all on the payroll. Hundreds of guests arrived that night. The parking lot filled with Cadillacs and luxury cars. Inside the motel ballroom, a giant portrait of Willie Jr. stood on stage, watching over the celebration. Flukey and his wife renewed their vows right there in front of the crowd. Champagne flowed. Live music played. The Kingpin moved through the room in a custom silk suit, shaking hands and smiling like the night was just another business deal. He paid for everything out of pocket, cash from the empire that never stopped running. The party sent a clear message. Flukey was still in control. He was still the man who could turn pain into power. The heroin houses kept operating. The money kept coming in. But the choice of location left some people uneasy. It was bold, almost defiant. Authorities monitoring the event from a distance took note. They saw the display of wealth and wondered how long the Kingpin could keep this pace without drawing more heat. Flukey, however, felt untouchable that night. He had turned the site of his worst loss into his personal stage. The empire looked stronger than ever. Yet in the weeks that followed, one new face quietly joined his inner circle. A bodyguard who had been recommended by a trusted lieutenant. Someone who would soon be riding in the same limousine on cold November nights. Flukey brought the new bodyguard into the fold just weeks after the anniversary party. Earl Wilson had been recommended by a trusted lieutenant. He was quiet, reliable, and always close at hand. Flukey liked that. The Kingpin was feeling the heat from all sides now. Authorities had stepped up their surveillance on the drug houses. Federal agents were circling. Rivals sensed weakness after the murder of his son. But Flukey kept moving forward. He still rode in the same black Cadillac limousine, still wore the silk suits, still made the calls that kept the empire alive. On the night of 19 November 1986, everything changed in a matter of seconds. The limousine cruised through the South Side streets. Flukey sat in the back. His driver was at the wheel. Earl Wilson rode right there with them. Then the shots rang out from inside the car. Wilson turned on his boss without hesitation. Bullets tore through Flukey and the driver. The limousine swerved and came to a stop. Both men were dead before help could arrive. The betrayal hit the streets like a shockwave. Investigators quickly pieced together what happened. Wilson had been working both sides. He had turned on the man who paid him. Within days, authorities arrested him and charged him with the murders. The once untouchable empire began to fracture. The drug houses lost their central command. The money flow slowed. Yet the South Side still showed up for its Kingpin one final time. More than 7,000 people packed the funeral. Cadillacs filled every block around the church. Mourners lined the streets as the procession rolled past the same corners Flukey had once ruled. They remembered the man who handed out cash in hard times, the flamboyant figure who turned tragedy into spectacle. Some called him a Robin Hood. Others simply called him the boss. In the end, Flukey Stokes left behind a story bigger than any single empire. He had risen from pool halls to millions, buried a son in a Cadillac coffin, thrown a fortune at the site of his deepest pain, and fallen to the very man sworn to protect him. The throne was empty. If you want more raw Chicago hood stories like Flukey's, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment with the next gangster you want covered. We'll see you in the next one.